The American Constitutional Republic. Affairs of state in Oklahoma. The beliefs, principles, opinions, and views of people just like me. This is 3D Politics.
And Tommy, you are on the air.
Featuring your verbal Viking, Tommy McKay, right here every Monday night on Facebook, 3D Politics Live. Tommy McKay, your verbal Viking, perspicuous blunderer of conversation tonight, as you can see on the screen. Media mind control, elite manipulation. It's what's going on to us right now. It's not a new trick. It's an old trick. So tonight I've got with me Kevin and Janelle Batts. Let's bring them in right now. There they are, the dynamic
how's it going?
duo. Nice to see you again, Janelle. Thanks for joining us. And
Good
Kevin,
to see you.
Thank you very much. And Kevin, thank you for bringing your fine production to my show. This is like bringing FM quality music to the AM quality station. This is pretty nice. It's pretty abrasive over here. What you guys do is some fine quality stuff. Now, I know we're operating with audio that is coming from one of the productions from Red River TV. And while Red River TV has the licensing for it and the authorization to play it, I don't. So if we get in the middle of the thing and somehow Big Brother yanks us down, we'll put us right back up as quickly as we can and discuss these things without the audio. Also, I got to remind everybody, next week, what a great coup. I've got Frank Urbanek coming next week, who just announced today he is running for mayor in Oklahoma City against Holt and et cetera, whoever else is running. But next week, lawyer at large, Frank Urbanek here on 3D Politics. We're very pleased to have him coming up next week. But without further ado, we're going to talk about some stuff: the Milgram Study, the Hofling Hospital experiment, Operation Northwoods. Before we get to that, though, I got to find out a little bit about you two and find out how you guys met, how you got into it. I know that the Red River Chronicle is Kevin Batts and Janelle Batts from Oklahoma, veteran of the Iraq and Afghanistan, currently working in the energy sector. So you're a lover of America, Kevin, and Janelle, you've wanted to be a writer all your life. Seems like you're doing it now. And so how did you guys come together and meet, first of all, and then how did love blossom, and then how did you guys put together this this production team that you have?
Go ahead.
You want to go first?
Bachelor number one.
Well, interesting enough, we met when we were very young, and I grew up in Oklahoma. I was born in Texas, but grew up here. And he didn't actually grow up here, but we happened to meet while we were in high school. I thought he was a big jerk. I thought he was a jerk at the time.
Standard procedure.
Yeah. And
but never since, I'm sure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, it was interesting just how God brought us together. And, he ended up, we ended up being friends, and then we ended up, dating. And then, he ended up going to, was it Iraq the first time? Yeah. And when he came back, he asked me to marry him. I said yes. And then we ended up moving to Texas after then. And what was interesting, though, is that we never even like remotely planned to be doing any of this. Like, this was never, we weren't like super, we were not super political people. For me, my experience in it was, I was home, we were in Texas, and I had like 2 small children at the time. And I kept, saying, man, somebody should do something about this crazy stuff that's happening, in our country.
Yeah, this was during the Obama administration.
Right.
So
yeah.
It was the first term. It was not cool to be against Obama at the time. So we were freaking pioneers.
Oh, man, yeah.
Yeah.
But that's a natural reaction of people.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a natural
Yeah, absolutely.
reaction of people that they're just doing their lives, and suddenly it becomes bad enough for them to where the light comes on and they rear up their hockles and get after it. So go on. So you didn't. So it's not like you met in video editing class and you both just loved video stuff. I love the way you team up. We're gonna explore some of the way you guys complement each other. Janelle does much of the scripted narration, and Kevin does the some fantastic video editing. And some of the information you've uncovered for us tonight, I knew some of it, but there were stuff in there I learned. I had no idea about some of the.
Same here.
Yeah.
Some of it is gruesome detail. It was amazing. So how did you collate that information? How did you find it?
I would just say I usually start my writing off, something spurs it, and usually I'll have something that kind of tips me off that I need to start writing. I can't remember exactly what this one was, but I started writing about how the relationship between the military industrial complex and the medical industrial complex. So I started trying to think about that. And as I started looking into that, I wrote like the main premise, and then I expanded out from there. That's usually how I write. I write a main premise. I know in my gut, what's going on. And then I expand out and I try to find the sources that try to confirm those different things. So a lot of it was just Googling around until I found different things that kind of seemed like they made sense and they fit. And there were a lot of other things that I could have raised as examples, but I had to cut those out for time. So, I mean, these things are endless. When you start looking into some of the things that the government's done in terms of testing vaccines and testing out new vaccines on children, we had a study that was out of LA County, just in 1990. They had an experimental vaccine for I can't remember what it was, but it's an experimental vaccine and they tested it on children, Black and Hispanic children, and I think that one was like Pfizer or something like that. They were testing, and they didn't tell the parents, and they got in trouble for that. So I mean, these things, they're numerous. They're all over the place. You see these all over, where the military-industrial complex and the medical-industrial complex, they're not held accountable. And they play off of our fears. So it follows the same scenario every single time. You have an event, and then they capitalize on that event by taking away our liberties, and also they reap the benefits of it, i.e. money, whether that be for an illegal war or that be for a drug that a lot of times turns out to be harmful.
Right, always scooping up your freedoms in the name of safety will make you safe, etc. So we've got a lot of video, and so we're likely to go long and we're going to find out if they yank us down. So stay tuned. Let's get to that Milgram study. Kind of set us up, and let's see if we can roll the video after you set us up. What was the Milgram study?
Okay, essentially the Milgram study this is like the key of. This is actually what spurred the whole video. This was the bedrock of the whole video, the premise. And my thoughts were, what studies are about obedience? And that's what I was looking for. What does science say about people obeying authorities? And as I looked into it, the gold standard of studies to do with obedience was the Milgram study. And Milgram, he was fascinated by the Nazi war crime trials. I messed up the name, but he was fascinated by the Nuremberg trials. Yeah, he was fascinated by the Nuremberg trials, and that was the trial for all the SS henchmen, all the Nazi henchmen, where they actually faced justice. And Adolf Eichmann, and when he went in there, he was basically like, "This isn't my fault. I was just following orders," and he was just stunned by that. And so he wanted to look into and say, well, would people just follow orders? And when he went into it, he was shocked to find out that like 80 to 90% plus people will just follow orders if someone gave them an order to do something. And so that's what this segment is about. So let's go into it.
All right, let's get into the Milgram study. This is some great production by Kevin and Janelle Batts from Red River TV. We'll watch along.
behind the study. Stanley Milgram, an American social psychologist, was known for his controversial experiments that exposed the limits of societal obedience. Milgram, whose parents fled the Nazi regime, was inspired by the Holocaust, notably the trial of Adolf Eichmann. Adolf Eichmann managed the logistics for the mass deportation of Jews across the German-controlled areas to the extermination camps. Milgram took great interest in the trial for the SS officer, mainly Eichmann's defense that he was just following orders. During the trial, even when faced with the horrific actions that took place at his direction, he showed no signs of guilt. In a statement requesting a pardon, he said, "There is a need to draw a line between the leaders responsible and the people like me, forced to serve as mere instruments in the hands of the leaders." This argument and indifference likely played an internal role into what inspired this experiment, into how submission to governing edicts and governing authority shape the human mind and the actions that follow. How did the experiment work? The study worked like this. Volunteers were recruited to participate in a study of learning. The volunteer was told that the student was also a fellow volunteer. They drew straws, and the straws were fixed. So the volunteer would always be the volunteer, and the student would always be the student. The student was placed in an electric chair, and the volunteer, who was called the teacher, would administer the shocks to the student. The student and teacher were placed in separate rooms. The teacher was told to issue an electric shock.
I'm up to 180 volts.
Please continue, teacher.
Needle, you're gonna get a shock. 180 volts. You can't stand it. I'm not gonna kill that man, eh? I mean, who's gonna take the responsibility if anything happens to that gentleman?
I'm responsible for anything that happens here. Continue, Fred.
You accept all the responsibility?
The responsibility is mine, correct. Please go on.
Gold, dollar, necklace, moon, paint. Answer, please. Are you all right? 405 volts. The answer is moon.
The teacher was told every time the student gave the wrong answer, he was to increase the voltage of the shock. During the study, the experimenter was told he was only allowed to prod the teacher 4 times during the experiment. The prod consisted of 4 canned responses. After the prods, the experiments would end. Prod 1 was, "Please continue." Prod 2 was, "The experiment requires you to continue." Prod 3, "It is absolutely essential that you continue." Prod 4, "You have no other choice but to continue." The teacher was told that the shocks ranged from 15 volts, a slight shock, to a severe shock of 375, to a critical shock level of 450 volts.
You're listening to 3D Politics right here. Tommy McKay, your Verbal Viking, joining me tonight with some hard-hitting video production with Red River TV. Kevin and Janelle Batts with the Red River Chronicle. That is some amazing stuff. So that is one study that I am familiar with, having done some college in my time. They do expose you to this particular experience. To me, how it reminded me of children in 2 different ways. One, too soon comedically, but you know, the kid when they're grounded in their own room having to clean it. Oh, I'm dying here. It's just, you know, it's just a joke.
That's funny.
It's a joke. But then the other thing is, like a child, if a child says, 13-year-old says, let me drive your car. If I wreck it, I'll take responsibility. Well, it's like the person that says in the experiment, I'll take responsibility, literally cannot take responsibility. So what else do you know about that study?
Well,
Tell us more about that study before we go on.
What we didn't show at the end, the results were that 100% of them went up to 350 volts. I think it was 375 volts. And if you don't know anything about electricity, 375 volts, I mean, that in a normal, like, strong young man, you know, he'd probably be okay. Anyone else would probably be in the hospital. When he got, the video continues, it's a pretty long video. There's a point when he gets above, I say, like 250, the person stops talking. So he's shocking someone who's obviously unconscious, and he's still just going along with it. And these are all the people that did it. They all went to 375.
Now, to be clear, the person's not actually being shocked, but the person who's doing the shocking,
but he thinks that.
They
think it is.
So when the person's no longer responding, the person who continues to shock is like mindless at that point.
Yeah.
Continuing to pile on shocking to what would be, you know, potentially a dead person.
Yeah.
So this is one of the things that's been brought up in the past about constitutional abuse, where a policeman will do an unconstitutional act and then say, I'm just doing my job. And so, you know, the point's been made that that's literally that person is doing the unconstitutional act, not the system. This has been a thing brought up when I've argued, I don't believe and I really, because you guys are intelligent, I'll just veer off script for a second. What do you think? Can a system be racist? Because I've said systems can't be racist. That's like personifying an inanimate object. Systems can't be racist. People can be racist. You can set up a system that says be racist. But the system isn't racist when the person does the racist act. That's the racist act, just like this thing here. When the person does the shocking, that's when they've overstepped their responsible
here's a
bounds.
good example of that. Facebook, the line of code that is Facebook, the code itself, the program, the software isn't biased against conservatives. The software is set up in a way to where it is biased because the way they set the software up, the software in itself isn't biased. The software in effect would be the system. Yes, the controllers of that. So it's the people that are above it that are actually telling it, do this, don't do this. Those are the people. And as far as police officers, you know, I do think that there's a fine line between just following orders and following procedures and actually having some culpability and some things, but you have to, you know it when you see it. So it's not something you can really just write down, but when you look at it, you're like, yep, cross the line there, buddy.
Well, there's been checks and balances with systems, but they're not understanding that the checks and balances always starts with the individual, and that everything that unfolds in every system is directly connected to who are the controllers of that system. If you are upset because, for instance, if a police officer is enforcing a law, a lot of people get mad at law enforcement, but not realize that they're not mad at the officer, they're mad at the law. But someone was in control of that law. So there's all these different ways that, you know, someone can look at something and say, well, you know, the system isn't racist, but yes, there could be people that are in a system that are putting legislation in place. Yeah.
Right. And it's a shell game of responsibility, because if the cop doing the racist act, this is back to the video with Eichmann, hey, all I'm doing is my job, man. Well, that's the shell game response. Well, no, you can't. If your responsibility is to do an illegal and immoral act, then it's literally not your responsibility. But you've redefined that according to a duty, an ethics of duty. And so if you move the responsibility from the person who does the infringement, and then the only recourse you have is to move it up through some sort of secondary court who can always move the shell. It's a horrible game. But let's move on to the Hofling Hospital experiment if you're ready.
All right. Do you want us to frame the Hofling experiment before we go, or do you want to
Yeah,
just go?
set that up. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Please.
So when I looked at the Milgram study, I was like, okay, what's the follow up to that? Because I need at least 2 or 3. You know, I like to believe in having 2 or 3 examples of something if I'm going to make a set of premise. So the second one, this was the follow up to the Milgram study, and essentially what the person was saying was like, nah, that Milgram guy was wrong because he was picking on just regular everyday people. They didn't know any better. We're going to go after people that do know better. So we're going to look at nurses. So they looked at nurses because they figured, hey, nurses. So they set up a similar scenario where the nurses would be forced to do something that went against just perceived morality when they were called by a doctor and they were asked to give a higher dosage than recommended on the bottle of medicine to a patient. So let's go into this study right now.
Excellent. Okay.
Hospital experiment. This version of the study follows nurses instead of random individuals. I guess the thinking was maybe those regular folks couldn't quite grasp the implication of the commands being given during the shock study. So what was the Hofling Hospital experiment? This study was called the Hofling Study, and it was conducted in 1966 and was thought to be a more realistic study of obedience to authority. The experiment involved 22 real night nurses. The fictitious doctor would phone the nurses and ask them to check the medicine cabinet and look for a drug titled estrogen. When they checked to see, they were able to see the maximum dosage for that drug was 10 milligrams. The doctor on the phone would tell them to administer 20 milligrams of the drug, double the maximum dosage according to the label. Mr. Smith, they were told, was the patient, and he was in desperate need in that the doctor would sign off later when he arrived. The phone call would end if either the nurses obeyed the order, resisted the order, went to seek advice, became upset, could not find the medication, or if the call lasted more than 10 minutes. Now, the pill was actually a sugar pill, obviously harmless. If the nurse tried to give the patient the drug, they would have been stopped. Also, if the nurse were to administer the drugs, they would be in violation of 3 hospital rules, which were: 1, they weren't allowed to accept instructions over the phone, and 2, the dose was double the maximum limit on the box, and 3, the medicine itself was unauthorized because it did not meet the stock list requirement for that ward.
They found that 21.
All right.
Excellent. So that's the Hofling Hospital experiment, and we've stopped some of Janelle's fine narration there so that we can discuss it. Tell us what you say during the narration, the more information about the Hofling. I was not familiar with the Hofling Hospital experiment at all.
Now, what we found in that was at 21 of the 22 nurses.
Yes, actually it's 95, 96%. Pretty much every nurse except for one.
That were basically willing to
except for one
give the maximum dose. Yeah, just right off the bat. And so that was very telling because, again, you're not dealing with people that answered an ad. You know what I mean? You're dealing with people that have been professionally trained. They have all of the knowledge. They know all of the protocols that are in place. But that was pretty staggering to me.
Yeah, and also
that they were willing to do that.
And also they
had
a control group in this one. Now this, to take a step back for a second, both of these studies, when you look at these studies, these are old school studies. These studies are looked at in a negative light by scientists and people who do this type of work because people aren't allowed to be emotionally affected by studies like this. So the fact that the people were negatively affected, these people were put through stress. So that's looked at as a negative. So they had a control group, and the control group was given the questionnaire on paper. They gave them the scenario on paper, and most of those nurses said, no, I wouldn't have did it. Now, obviously, most of those nurses were lying. They would have done it if they were in the same situation. There was a third study that we didn't speak about. We just touched on it because I couldn't find any information about it. It's called the Jacobson study, and it's the follow-up to that follow-up. And basically what that one was, they found that if the nurses knew the name of the drug and they knew about it, they were educated on the drug, they were less likely to follow the doctor's order. So what we got from that was, if a populace is armed with the facts, or at least armed with some information, they are less likely to go along. So the key is education.
That was I thought you punchline. That was a straight jab. That was a perfectly well described point made in your video, that once people know what the reality is, they'll typically do the right thing. If they're simply following orders, you can have them do anything wrong if you want to.
That's why they have to.
It's
that's
amazing.
why they have to hide information from you.
Yeah, and I mean, remember the thing you just sparked again, my fertile memory here. The guy calls in and has somebody undressed for a strip search at a restaurant, and they literally went all the way through with it. Literally, some person took off their clothes. Did you not see this?
No, I didn't.
The guy called in. The guy called in over the phone to a fast food restaurant. And so you need to look this one up and do an episode on this. And and they accused her of this and that, and literally did a strip search of an employee over the phone. And the manager was like, I can't do this. And he's like, you have to because of reasons. But the same thing is following that we're bringing out in this great interview. And I appreciate you bringing this high quality video to my show. This is extremely well done, a documentary. Tell them again where they can find the whole viewing of this over there at Red River TV. Tell them where they can find it.
You can go on Red River TV on Facebook, or you can go on Red River TV on YouTube. They are in both of those places. And in the future, once we launch our subscription service, it will be on redrivertv.com, and it will actually have uncut sections to add to, supplement this. So the next video in this series will be just on the website, because we'll actually dig deep into a lot of things that will get us banned off social media.
Yeah.
Good idea. And this is some very concentrated information. I'm not sure what you call it. I want to call it a documentary. It's like a documentary, but it's packed together with in a half hour, all this stuff. So again, yes, ma'am.
Oh, no, you're
Janelle,
good. I was
did you
agreeing.
have a comment?
No, I was agreeing with you.
Oh my God. And I am not used to that. Trust me. Not you, but anybody. So we're coming up towards the end of the bottom of the hour. We're going to talk about the Operation North Woods coming up. Is that correct?
Yes.
And what is that one? Set that up, because we're going to come back after the. Set that up, and then we'll come back after the break.
Is a lot like the mainstream. It's a lot of people have heard of Operation Northwoods. Essentially, Operation Northwoods was a declassified document that showed that the Joint Chiefs of Staff during the Kennedy administration wanted to go to war with Cuba, but they couldn't because they really didn't have a reason. So their idea was, let's launch a bunch of false flags across the United States. Let's blow up boats. Let's blow up bridges. Let's hurt people. Let's blow up Cuban refugee boats and blame it on the Cubans so we can go to war with Cuba. That's essentially what it is.
You're listening to the setup for Operation Northwoods from Kevin and Janelle Batts at Red River TV. We're going to put you guys and stop your video for a second. Come back at the bottom of the hour to bring you more exciting stuff from 3D Politics. Tommy McKay, the Verbal Viking. Here we are again. 3D Politics. Stay tuned for more with Kevin Batts and Janelle Batts, Red River TV. Who was that?
James Langford, the Lank, the Langster, Lanky, Mr. Lang, Langy Lang, Langton. You don't have to call me Johnson.
The American Constitutional Republic. Affairs of State in Oklahoma. The beliefs, principles, opinions, and views of people just like me. This is 3D Politics.
And trust me.
Trust me.
And Tommy, you are on the air.
There he is, the Verbal Viking, every Monday night, joining me with no further ado, Kevin and Janelle Batts, the dynamic duo from Red River TV. I have spent so much time going off of what we were going to do that we're headed into the vortex of nowhere. Operation Northwoods, I appreciate you guys sticking through the break. We have to do that for the affiliate when we get one. And so, Operation Northwoods, let's roll tape on that after the setup from the last hour.
All right. You want me to bring it? You want me to tell the whole setup again?
No, we'll just roll that. You set it up, and they are waiting.
All righty. Let's go.
There we go. We're working this production through on Zoom. Thank you, Kevin Batts.
Operation Northwoods. In the 1960s, top military leaders proposed perpetrating false terrorist attacks across the United States in order to instigate a war with Cuba and communism as a whole. They proposed hijacking planes, blowing up U.S. ships, and sinking boats of Cuban refugees. The plan was later rejected by then U.S. President John F. Kennedy. The words of his predecessor, Dwight D. Eisenhower, likely played a role in his rejection to the plot. Dwight Eisenhower served at the highest levels of the military, and during his final address to America, he said this:
"Who is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals."
All righty.
Wow. There's an oldie, but a good one.
Yeah, absolutely. Classic.
So the old military industrial, yeah, exactly. Military industrial complex, which one of the great punchlines to this media mind control video that you put out is how you align that with the healthcare industrial complex. It's a fantastic parallel that you guys draw. And so that's Operation Northwoods. I've never heard of that, where they plan to do all that business. It's almost like Fast and Furious, where they're trying to get us in trouble with our own guns, etc.
Yeah.
And I talked about too, was like, you know, this was probably the last time that a president was able to do something like this, because you see after that, you know, when you look at history, you could see that you look at the Vietnam War and the things that helped start that was started by a false flag. But you can just see where, I'm not trying to say he was assassinated for something like this, but I would say when you look at him and his brother and the things that they did, just looking into this, him and his brother are mentioning this whole thing, and that was by accident. He was with his brother, denounced the experiments going on at that mental institution in New York later on in the documentary.
Yes.
And he
Yes.
basically said, no, we're not going to do these false flags. What are you talking about? And then after that, he's assassinated. So I think that this is part and parcel to some of the things. And when you go against the deep state, you are opened up to a lot of different things that you wouldn't be opened up to, like phony elections.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I kind of experienced that Kennedy assassination as a young child. I was very young, not enough to understand the impact of it, but
Yeah.
I didn't experience it personally at 2 years of age. You can't know that kind of stuff, but I do know that my 2-year-old was afraid of airplanes after the 2001 9/11 event. So 2-year-olds can be affected by what's going on in the world.
Absolutely.
But I know that I delved into a lot of the information about JFK and studied up, and so I came to the same conclusion that the Russians did, and that is that LBJ did it. And so you look into LBJ, and a lot of people don't know this. LBJ was elected into the Senate in 1931. 1931.
And even that election
Wow.
where he won was shrouded in a lot of infamy because of a lot of ballot box. I know all these conspiracy theories. A lot of there was a county. We lived next to the county that was there was a ballot
you're
box
from Texas,
that was in
that's
question.
right.
Yeah. So we know about LBJ.
LBJ though. LBJ was, but people don't understand. So in 1960, talk about deep state. In 1963, LBJ had already been there for over 3 decades.
Oh, yeah,
he was
absolutely.
running stuff. Talk about military-industrial complex.
Yeah, absolutely.
Here's
And that's
a
why
guy
he was
who
brought
could-
in for Kennedy, is because Kennedy was looked at as like, okay, this guy's some kind of change maker, and look at, he's a Catholic. I mean, there was a lot of problems with the establishment in Kennedy, and he brought LBJ in because LBJ had been a mover and shaker in DC for so long, and he was a cutthroat guy, and he was just known to be like a heavyweight in DC at the time. So when he brought LBJ in with him, it was kind of like, okay, it was a stabilizing thing where you have this newcomer and then you have LBJ. So that's pretty much that.
Unfortunately, though, LBJ and his little brother used to make fun of the old man, call him the fossil and stuff, and that's what got him shot.
Yeah.
So that's just how I'm not saying anything. I'm just saying some stuff. Too soon. Every JFK joke I make, my son's like, too soon, too soon.
Well, we got the war report in our library, and it's prominently displayed. So you want to see some propaganda, you can go ahead and read that.
Hey man, I'm totally off script here because we're gonna go. I went to the Six Store Depository there, right?
really?
The big memorial thing, right? Now, when I was a kid, they made you swear upon the death of your mother that it was not a conspiracy. There was one guy that did it. It was Oswald, single guy, one guy. You walk through the library today, and they talk about the conspiracy. They admit now it was a conspiracy. When I was a child, when I was 9, hell, you don't even talk about conspiracy. One guy, or you're a nut job. But now they've admitted it. There was clearly more than one guy.
If these guys will blow up, if these guys will blow up American cities, and do bacterial attacks on American cities, and lie in front of the American people with false testimony for all the world to see, to start with Desert Storm, or lie about WMD when they knew the guy, that they got it from one source. We went to war over WMD for one guy who was lying. And it was one guy who the Germans said at the time, this guy's lying. We looked into his background. He's not a scientist. He's lying. And he came out later and said he was lying. So if we'll do all that, of course, they have no problem. The deep state has no problem bumping off the president and lying about it.
It's just insane. So, and yet 60% of the sheep want to trust the government every day with everything they've got. Is it the Nayirah? Is that correct? Nayirah Testimony? Is that the word?
Yeah.
Nayirah? Okay. So let's move into that now. The testimony from this young lady. Compelling.
Okay. So to set this up a little bit, a lot of people don't remember, but to start the start of Desert Storm, they the real thing that pushed people over the edge on the world community, as we like to say, the thing that pushed the world community over the edge is that the testimony of Nayirah. It's this young girl who they presented in front of this congressional committee, basically saying the Iraqis who had invaded Kuwait at the time, they were occupying it, they were going into hospitals and unplugging, taking incubators away from babies who were, you know, they were what is it? Babies that are
Premature.
Heinous acts
premature
of-
babies.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm.
And so
Okay.
they
Oh.
looked at that as like, this is a war crime. You know, we got to go to war for this. They found out later on that this girl, they found out later on, this girl, she was the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador to the United States. So, and also that the firm behind this whole charade, even the congressional panel itself was implicated in this whole scheme, because they knew about this girl and they knew her position. And basically they'd hire the biggest personal relations firm, public relations firm in the world, biggest. And if you're talking about Google, this doesn't even count when you're talking about a public relations firm. This firm bought the biggest public relations firm in Canada. They bought the biggest one in Ireland. They bought the biggest one in Britain. They bought the biggest one in the Asian country. These are huge. It's almost like 5 Googles put together as far as the public relations firm. 50% of the largest Fortune 500 companies in the world. That means half of the largest companies in the world use them for messaging. When President Trump was attacking WHO, they paid Hill and Knowlton, that's the name of the public relations firm, they paid them buku dollars, and you see what happened to them after Trump started going after them. Then social media started censoring Trump. This is a very powerful firm. So they were paid $10 million by the Kuwaitis, and their mission was to start a war, to bring America into the war and for the Kuwaitis. And that's exactly what happened. They used this testimony and the testimony of Nayirah. So let's go into that now.
Excellent. Thanks for that setup.
The false testimony of Nayirah. A 15-year-old Kuwaiti girl gave damning testimony about the atrocities during the Iraqi army's occupation of Kuwait. The world was stunned by these atrocities. Only problem was, it was completely made up.
While I was there, I saw the Iraqi soldiers come into the hospital with guns. They took the babies out of the incubators, took the incubators, and left the children to die on the cold floor. It was horrifying. I could not help but think of my nephew, who, if born premature, might have died that day as well.
The girl offered the testimony under oath at the Congressional Human Rights Caucus, a group formed by one Democrat and one Republican. We'll get more into that later. In the young girl's testimony, she stated that the Iraqis were removing babies from incubators and leaving them to die. This allegation was corroborated by Amnesty International. The testimony was a major contributing factor into the U.S. involvement in the region and led to Operation Desert Storm. If the media were curious at all, they would have easily found out that this little girl was no innocent bystander, but the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador to the United States. The Kuwaitis had hired Hill and Knowlton, an international public relations marketing firm, whose customers include the top media companies and 50% of all Fortune 500 companies. Are you getting it yet? If the media had half a brain, they would have seen that the Congressional Human Rights Caucus actually had offices in the Hill and Knowlton, Washington, D.C. Bureau office. Also, it was later found out that the Kuwaiti government paid Hill and Knowlton $10 million. And with that $10 million, Hill and Knowlton fabricated the story of this 15-year-old girl and used the ambassador's daughter to peddle this lie. Also, that Hill and Knowlton has spent $1 million on a focus group to figure out just what it would take to get the world outraged enough to go to war. This isn't to say the Iraqis shouldn't have been pushed back into Iraq, but when you look at the fact this story was completely fabricated out of whole cloth, and the media had to have been in on it simply because the story would have been so easy to unravel with just a simple search.
A media, not bought.
I'll cut into that a little bit.
You are listening to, that's fine. It's part of the video you can find over there at Red River TV. That was the Nayirah Testimony that took us to war. And again, you know, this is such a heavy episode. There's very little room for humor. But I will say, once you know she's lying and there are no real babies, it does remind me of a 14-year-old little girl lying. I only found she's like, I found the alcohol and I didn't
like I was telling Janelle.
You know, it's like, please, you know.
Like I was telling Janelle, I mean, she pretty much did that for her country. You had to know there was a conversation like, look, your country's not going to be your country anymore. Kuwait's going to be gone if you don't go in here and sell this. So I mean, she's going in there and she's like, I'm a patriot for Kuwait.
There was duress.
I'm going to do what I got. I'm going to do what I got to do to save my country. It's almost patriotic in her in that sense. You know, it makes
hell. She was under duress. She didn't. She was under duress, and if your dad's a guy who lops heads off, you're like, yes, sir. You know, what are you going to do? As a, you know, okay, no. You know, she didn't have a lot of room. You know, but that is some. Again, I mean, I'm not wonky. I don't follow a lot of stuff, but these things are stuff that if I don't know them, 90% of almost anybody doesn't know them, because most of the people think I know something. And so I'm not the only guy that gets pushback. No, this is some great stuff. So the Lie of WMD, set this one up for us.
So the Lie of WMD, I mean, this is something that most people at this point should know about. That WMD,
we've heard of it, but you've got a great production.
Yeah,
you've got some great production on it, so that's what we're here for.
When I was when I was more on the Team Bush side, you know, I was like, I heard the information. Okay, oh, well, it was sent over to Iran, or they sent it over to Syria, you know, in trucks, and that's why we couldn't find it. And also, oh yeah, we did find it. You know, those old stockpiles that they used against Iran when they were at war. But when I actually looked into this, I realized, wait a minute, this was a lie. They said that there were trucks with weapons making facilities built into them. And that's what they said. And so I looked into this. There was a gentleman, I can't pronounce his name now. This whole thing was based off of one guy. He went over to Germany and he said, look, they're going to try to kill me, but I'm defecting over from Iraq. I'm a chemist, and they have these mobile truck things that they have these factories in these trucks, and they're just wheeling them around and they're making these chemical weapons. And they used this, they just blew it up. And the British and the United States government, they blew this up and they cooperated and everything. And the Germans were like, this isn't real. This guy, we looked into his background. He's not a chemist. We asked him basic chemistry questions. He doesn't know any of it. And they still went ahead anyway and just lied. Bush knew this and still went out and said all this stuff. Oh my
God. Just insane.
Anyway, he ended up coming out a few years ago. I think I watched a long 60 Minutes thing on it, and I wish I could have put more of that in there, but man, they just filleted that whole story. 60 Minutes did back when they were actual journalists. Anyway, so turns out the whole thing was a lie. They knew it was a lie. They knew it wasn't true, and they peddled it, and the media followed it and everything, even though the media also knew, because these things are being leaked by Germany. The media could have put this out. They actually fired journalists that tried to speak out against this WMD's narrative when it was coming out. They fired big journalists on CNN. So this isn't left or right. This is when the military industrial complex or when the medical industrial complex gets something that they want to do, it's happening. It don't matter who, you know, is saying one way or the other. So let's go into this WMD.
Okay, the Lie of WMD, a more fine video production from Red River TV. That is Kevin and Janelle Batts.
It was a mistake. The war in Iraq, we spent $2 trillion, thousands of lives. We don't even have it. Iran is taking over Iraq with the second largest oil reserves in the world. Obviously, it was a mistake.
So
George Bush made a mistake. We can make mistakes, but that one was a beauty. We should have never been in Iraq. We have destabilized the Middle East.
But so you still think he should be impeached? I think
it's my turn. You do whatever you want. You call it whatever you want. I want to tell you, they lied.
Okay.
They said there were weapons of mass destruction. There were none, and they knew there were none. There were no weapons of mass destruction.
One of the biggest lies of the modern era is the lie of WMD in Iraq, weapons of mass destruction. Bush and his administration used the excuse of WMD as a catalyst to invade Iraq and depose the horrific dictator Saddam Hussein.
I take the threat very seriously. I take the fact that he develops weapons of mass destruction very seriously.
Now, what makes WMD one of the biggest lies of the modern era is because it served as the main pretense for us to go into war. The lie of WMD is so pernicious that there are people still to this day who posit this hoax. Let me be clear about something. There were never any weapons of mass destruction, as the Bush regime laid out as a pretext for war in Iraq. Sure, Iraq possessed old stockpiles of chemical weapons and had used these in the war with Iran. But there is a big difference between that and what they were claiming, which were mobile truck units with biological factories inside of them. The lie was based on the account of one man, Rafid Ahmad Alwan, an Iraqi defector who told German intelligence this tale. The U.S. and its allies not only spread this tale, but also corroborated it. The media, for its part, were all but willing accomplices, because at the end of the day, if it bleeds, it leads. This lie would prove staggering for the United States. $1.6 trillion spent over a decade. Leaders like Donald Rumsfeld assured America that the cost of the war would only be about $100 billion in total.
Wow. Once again, this is some fantastic production from Kevin and Janelle Batts over at Red River TV. There are some people who are just now joining us. Happy birthday, Kent, out there. And so tell us again, just to remind people where to find the full version of this video we are dissecting.
You can see the full version of this video on Red River TV on Facebook. Just type in Red River TV and you'll see us. And then, or you can go on YouTube and type in Red River TV. This part, I think, where I made my biggest mistake of this entire mini doc. And I think where I messed up was
I call it.
Yeah, documentary.
I didn't put the human cost on there. I put the financial cost, and I should have put the human cost. You know, they were probably
well,
like 20
let's talk about that. That's why we're examining this.
Yeah.
In the lie of the WMDs.
Yeah, absolutely.
Man, there were tens
of millions of people killed in that. So I should have put that in there, and I didn't. And I feel like it's a glaring, oversight on my part to just put the dollar amount when there are tens of millions of people that were killed by this.
Okay,
lie.
then I see. Well, that's a great. Now I feel like I've done my job, because really all I'm doing is sitting back tonight watching your amazing editing skills, and we're glossing over. Janelle, I should have let you watch the kids tonight. Poor Janelle, she's like, why does he want me there?
This was a fun. This was actually, though, a very cool video to do. These types of videos actually remind him and I all the time of what we're really passionate about, and that these are really the types of videos that we want to get more into. It's been very, very difficult, being on social media where you're constantly being censored. I mean, Facebook has known for a long time that, we were growing. They saw the potential. I mean, our numbers were good, and then they just shut us down. And so that's why we were working on the other side of this thing to we want to produce something where people are going to get truth and they're going to get information to them, whether it's for their state or whether it's for their nation, as best we can. And we don't want to hold back. So that's why we do these types of videos.
Yeah.
This is excellent. Yeah, I appreciate that. What the people are missing tonight that they get with the whole video production is Janelle's excellent narration in between the clips we're showing you tonight, because she brings you all of the concise information. But I wanted to bring on the dynamic duo because there's a chemistry between you all and a new empathy, I think. I mean, I think it's a great point that you bring out, Kevin. Really not. This is where I feel like I'm doing a good thing because I don't see it as a glaring error. You do, that you didn't bring up a thing that you think you should have prioritized in your video. But again, we know that we're not only perfecting what we produce, we're perfecting the ability to produce it. And so not every production is exactly everything we want. What you've done is some great work here, and you got to check it out at Red River TV. We got one more, the Willow Brook experiment, and this brings us to a person we all know, which is Geraldo Rivera. Set this up, and we're not too far off time.
No, absolutely not.
Awesome.
So the Willow Brook experiment was essentially, at the time, this was the largest mental institution in the world. And people that don't know, we used to put people that were mentally ill in mental facilities. And there were these mental facilities for adults and there were some for kids. Well, this one was for kids and it was ran out of New York. It had 5,600 mentally challenged children in it, all the way down to, I think, like 5 or 6 years old. So these things were very poorly run. Kids were running around and they weren't monitored very closely. They were covered. A lot of times they were covered in their own feces and other people's feces. They were nude, and a lot of neglect and a lot of different things going on. So a lot of diseases were rampant in these institutions. Well, what a scientist, not just this one guy, this happened a bunch of different times. It's just one instance, but a scientist went to this school and they said, you know what, I can help you guys out. I'm going to go in here and I'm going to try to figure out, I'm trying to study hepatitis and figure out if there's vaccines. So I'm going to recruit parents to come in, and there was a line to get into the school, but to cut in front of the line, you could enter your child into this study. Well, the children that were in this hepatitis vaccine study for this guy, this scientist, they didn't have hepatitis. He gave them hepatitis. That's the thing. But his rationale was like, well, look, they'll get it anyway because this hepatitis
To
is
study
rampant
it.
in this facility. Yeah, and I need to study it.
He gave it to him today. This is the Tuskegee thing.
Yeah. And
This
if
is
you
exactly
and if you
the
were
Tuskegee.
this
Let's
is
give him-
considered a Tuskegee type
Sick. It's
thing.
just sick, man.
And so what they ended up doing at the end, if you look him up, you look up his name, oh yeah, they look down on him. They didn't look down on him at the time because when he got done doing this study, he got to be in charge of a big major pediatric lobbying firm in Washington, D.C. So he got to be the president of that. So I can't tell that they were really disappointed in his studies on children. He was actually rewarded in a lot of ways. But let's go into this Milgram study.
Typical. Okay, let's do it. This is another excellent portions of the video. This portion of the video is the Willow Brook experiment. Kevin and Janelle
Experiments. Children in a mental hospital in Staten Island, New York, were subject to a study to find a vaccine for hepatitis. Now let's rewind back for a second. During this time in history, in the 1950s, children with mental issues were put into mental institutions. There was a doctor named Dr. Krugman. He was a former flight surgeon in the U.S. Army Corps. He went to the school with a proposition. He wanted to create a vaccine for hepatitis and knew the perfect place and where he could do research. Willow Brook was overcrowded and already rampant with disease at the time, and it wasn't uncommon to test vaccines on children. The children were told to ingest a cocktail of feces and chocolate milk in order to be infected with the disease and to test their immunity. Dr. Saul Krugman oversaw these tests. Families, desperate for help with their mentally disabled children, were pushed to the front of the line for admissions if they were to allow this man to test on their children. A lot of families did. They didn't know any better. Regardless of what you may think of this, the medical community was mostly in support of this. The doctor received awards for his work and was even made the president of the American Pediatric Society, a national organization that has as its mission to advance child health. The facility, however, Willow Brook, was criticized by figures like Robert F. Kennedy, then a New York senator, who was reported as saying there are no civil liberties for those put in the cells of Willow Brook. He denounced the practices of the hospital. In congressional testimony, now you may know this name, Geraldo Rivera, who was a local reporter at the time in New York, snuck into the hospital, and what he saw shocked Americans across the country.
It's been more than 6 years since Robert Kennedy walked out of one of the wards here at Willow Brook and told newsmen of the horror he'd seen inside. He pleaded then for an overhaul of a system that allowed retarded children to live in a snake pit. But that was way back in 1965, and somehow we'd all forgotten. I first heard of this big place with the pretty sounding name because of a call I received from a member of the Willow Brook staff, a Dr. Michael Wilkins. The doctor told me he'd just been fired because he'd been urging parents with children in one of the buildings, building number 6, to organize so they could more effectively demand improved conditions for their children. The doctor invited me to see the conditions he was talking about, so unannounced and unexpected by the school administration, we toured building number 6. The doctor had warned me that it would be bad. It was horrible. There was one attendant for perhaps 50 severely and profoundly retarded children, lying on the floor naked and smeared with their own feces. They were making a pitiful sound, a kind of mournful wail that it's impossible for me to forget. This is what it looked like, this is what it sounded like, but how can I tell you about the way it smelled? It smelled of filth, it smelled of disease, and it smelled of death. We've just seen something that's probably the most horrible thing I've ever seen in my life. Is that typical of ward life?
Yes, there are 5,300 patients at Willow Brook, which is the largest institution for the mentally retarded in the world.
Now, the experts who ran this facility were not held accountable, and the pharmaceutical industry only enriched themselves with the research gleaned from this horrible, horrible activity.
Well, that's a real downer. I mean, wow. So you can see that Geraldo has been around for a long time, and he was trying to do some good work. And you can see that we're coming up on 1 decade away from 100 years of government facade lying to us. And it's not just a simple matter of government lies to us. Like you said, Kevin, people die. Thousands and thousands of people die, and they don't just die, they're tortured, you know? I mean, this is crazy. We're you know, it's 1921 right now. We are 10 years, they've been lying to us the whole time. It has been a series for 100 years, and even today, my neighbors, I say my neighbors, Peggy from the World Opinion problem for me in my I think, than who's president. Biden has less effect on me than the people closer to home. And I think, and let me ask you this, to try to bring away from some of the fantastic production, the Willow Brook experiment, again, all these things we've talked about tonight, produced by Red River TV, Kevin and Janelle Batts, the dynamic duo, making what I like to call documentures. You learn a whole hell of a lot in 30 minutes. But notice how we go all this time, and they're still lying to us. I think, and I want to get your intelligent response to this. A lot of smart people say there's no reason to argue with more. That's why I stay off Facebook and I don't argue on Twitter. And I say flooding the social media with the proper argument is what has to happen. We have to bark out all of the stupid voices on Twitter with the right voice, and that it's important to go ahead and say the right thing and argue these idiots down. Am I wrong to waste my time? She says yes. Janelle's like, hell yeah, you're wasting your time. She's like my wife. Why do you argue with these morons? We've lost your audio. Hold on. We've lost your audio. Where are you? Check your audio.
Oh, we're back. We're good.
There you go. Okay. So
there we go.
I say we got to flood I think it's all about public opinion. There's no difference between a king and a dictator. They both have the same power. We love one, we hate it all public opinion. I say we flood Facebook, social media, and Twitter with the proper public opinion instead of shying away. What do you say, Janelle?
Well, I mean, I have to agree. I hear a lot of people that will say things like, we should just Facebook, because they're just so mean to us. They're just so this. Twitter is so crazy. And I realize that, there are people that like, certain platforms better than others. I totally get that. And I'm not saying that we don't need new platforms, because we do. But I think that there has to be a place where we're not just abandoning, as my husband says, we're not just abandoning the ship. It's still a place where there has to be something filling the vacuum. And if the vacuum is constantly being filled with all of the stuff that they want to coerce Americans with and sway opinions and sway beliefs and manipulate the constituents of America, I think that if we aren't filling that vacuum with the contradicting sound, I think that you're going to have a much longer run when it comes to the manipulation of the mind. I think you're going to see the next 5 and 6 generations completely manipulated because no one is speaking out. As long as someone is speaking out, I say this all the time to people, if they shut you down on social media, go online and write about it. If they shut you down there, you go to the streets. You go to the grocery store. If you have to stand up on your roof and you have to bang on a pot, we keep speaking the truth until you just can't anymore. There has to be those types of people in this day and time.
Amen. Oh, it's beautiful. I love you guys working together. It's a wonderful thing that you can share this passion that you have to create these things. It's wonderful. So, and once again, my humble, gracious appreciation for bringing these high level productions to my low level show.
Well, we appreciate you having us on.
Gosh, thank you, because this is some great stuff. And I wanted to break it up for my audience, that is, break your video up to kind of inoculate them from what I do typically to the higher level video production that you all present. And again, you got to watch the 30-minute episode of the Media Mind Control, Red River TV, Kevin and Janelle Batts. Anything else before we get out of here?
No, that's pretty much it, man. I think
you
we
guys
hit pretty good. I appreciate it.
Man, that is some heavy stuff. Very little room for jokes tonight for me. I'll tell you, it's some heavy stuff. There's some very heavy stuff. But my big win tonight is that Janelle agreed with me that we do have to keep fighting out there, and and I'm not, so we are headed into the next decade to try to fight this stuff off. I appreciate you guys for being here. So I think at this point we'll just bring in the music. We'll send you guys away. Find Janelle and Kevin Batts over there at Red River TV. Thanks once again for being here. I'm going to put you guys. So I'm going to stop your video. There you go. We'll see you guys next week. And don't forget, next week I have got the amazing lawyer at large Frank Urbanik, who's going to give us an update on the cases against Stitt and Holt. The current mayor of Oklahoma City, Holt, is got a case pressing against him as well as Governor Stitt. Frank Urbanik is going to bring us all that information, and he is also just announced today that he's running for Oklahoma City mayor. Frank Urbanik campaigns for Oklahoma City mayor, and we'll see him on our show next week. Thanks again to Kevin and Janelle Batts.
James Lankford, the Lank, the Lankster, Lanky, Mr. Lang, Langy Lang, Langton. You don't have to call me Johnson. Yeah!